The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the lights overhead. A camera panned across the audience, catching a dozen faces waiting to see whether justice would be quiet or explosive today. In the middle of that anticipation sat a woman with thick eyeliner, a pearl necklace, and a box of tissues clutched dramatically in her hand. Her name was Karen Benton, 42 years old, self-proclaimed queen of the Willow Park Homeowners Association, and every inch of her posture screamed entitlement. She had spent years bullying her neighbors with late fees and violation notices, and now, for the first time in her adult life, she was the one on trial. Her opponent, a quiet, trembling nurse named Maya Lopez, who looked more like someone attending a wake than a court hearing. But there was one thing that made this case unlike any other Judge Judy had presided over: the golden retriever sitting by her bench. Scout had been a fixture in the courtroom for months, a calm, trained therapy dog Judge Judy often kept close during tense cases. Most of the time he slept through proceedings. But today his eyes never left Karen Benton. The audience didn't notice it yet, but the dog's attention would soon turn this entire courtroom upside down. The case was simple on paper. Maya Lopez had sued her HOA president for harassment and fraudulent fines. But once Karen opened her mouth, it became something much bigger. The transcript would later show that in less than 10 minutes, the world saw one of the most unconvincing performances of fake emotion ever televised, and that Judge Judy's dog, not a witness or lawyer, would be the one to expose it. "Miss Benton," Judge Judy began, her voice crisp as breaking glass. "You're accused of issuing over $9,000 in fines to this woman for violations that appear to have no legal basis whatsoever. Do you understand the claim?" Karen dabbed at her eyes before answering. "Yes, Your Honor," she said in a trembling voice that could have belonged to a soap opera star. "This is a misunderstanding. I never meant to hurt Mrs. What's her name again?" "Lopez," Judge Judy snapped. "Yes, Mrs. Lopez. I was only doing my duty as president to protect our neighborhood. She broke several rules. I was enforcing them, that's all." Across the aisle, Maya gripped the edge of her folder. Inside were the letters that had kept her up for months, fines for things so absurd they sounded like satire. A chalk drawing her children had made on the driveway. A wreath deemed too bright. A recycling bin left out for 9 extra minutes. The harassment had been relentless, and the fines had escalated until Maya feared losing her home. Judge Judy leaned forward. 9 extra minutes, Miss Benton? You fined her $300 for a recycling bin?" Karen's lower lip quivered theatrically. "It's not about the bin, Your Honor. It's about standards. We have rules for a reason." Scout tilted his head. Judge Judy noticed. "Rules for a reason," Judy repeated slowly, tapping her pen. "And yet, you issued over 27 violation letters to this woman alone in 18 months. That sound like reason to you?" Karen sniffled and reached for a fresh tissue. The sound of the crinkle was louder than her supposed sob. "I just wanted her to follow the rules. That's all I ever wanted. This whole thing," she paused dramatically, "is destroying my life." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Her performance had that familiar ring of falseness, the kind people put on when they know they're being watched. Maya looked down, not out of pity but disbelief. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. "Destroying your life? You collected fines from this woman totaling $9,450. You threatened to place a lien on her home. And now you want to tell me you're the victim?" Karen's tears seemed to come faster. Too fast. Her makeup was untouched, her voice not breaking, but her hands trembled just enough for the cameras to catch it. It was an act honed by years of getting her way through guilt. The same tactic she used in every HOA meeting when challenged. "Mrs. Lopez," Judge Judy turned to Maya, "tell me in your own words what happened." Maya took a deep breath. "It started when my kids drew with chalk on our driveway. She fined us $500 for defacing community property. I tried to talk to her about it, but she ignored my letters. Then she fined us for our grass. She said it was half an inch too long. I was working double shifts at the hospital trying to keep up with bills. It just kept getting worse." Karen interrupted, her voice sharp through the sobs. "She's lying, Your Honor. She's exaggerating everything. The grass was—" "Miss Benton, you will not interrupt," Judge Judy snapped. The authority in her tone hit like thunder. "You had your chance to speak. You will sit there and listen now." Karen shrank back, clutching her tissue again. Scout's gaze followed her every move. Maya continued softly. "After a while it felt like she was watching us. She drove past our house every day. Once, she left a letter taped to my door that said, 'Some people don't belong here.' My kids were home when they saw it." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the camera operators glanced up. Judge Judy's expression hardened like carved stone. "Is that true, Miss Benton?" she asked. Karen pretended to wipe a tear. "That letter was taken out of context, Your Honor. I meant some people don't belong ignoring community rules. I never meant it personally. I was under a lot of stress." Scout stood. No bark, no growl, just a deliberate rise to his feet. He looked at Karen's trembling hand, sniffed the air, and took one cautious step toward her. The entire courtroom froze. Judge Judy looked from the dog to the defendant, her brow furrowing slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Scout's instincts were almost never wrong. Karen's tissue shook in her hand, and her eyes darted to the camera before lowering again. "Good boy," she muttered nervously as if trying to charm him. But the dog didn't wag his tail. He sat perfectly still, gaze locked on her hand. The same hand that held the tissue she'd been using to dab those suspiciously dry eyes. Judge Judy finally leaned forward. "Something wrong, Scout?" The audience chuckled softly. But in a moment they would stop laughing. Because that dog had just sensed something that would turn fake tears into hard evidence, and transform this case into one of the most shocking courtroom moments ever seen on television. For a few tense seconds nobody moved. Scout's sudden alertness had frozen the room in that rare heavy silence that only happens when everyone senses something they can't yet explain. Judge Judy's eyes, sharp and calculating, moved from the dog to the defendant. Karen Benton still clutched her tissue like it was proof of innocence, but now her confident expression had begun to falter. Her bottom lip trembled, not from grief but from something much closer to fear. "Miss Benton," Judge Judy said evenly, her voice cutting through the stillness, "why don't you set that tissue down on the table for a moment?" Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the judge replied. "Set it down." Karen hesitated, her eyes darting from the camera crew to the rows of spectators. She slowly placed the crumpled tissue on the defendant's table. Scout's nose twitched as he sniffed the air again, head tilting slightly, his gaze fixed on the object. The golden retriever took a cautious step forward, sniffed once more, then sat back down, letting out a faint, almost dismissive exhale. Judge Judy's gaze sharpened. "Interesting," she murmured. "He's never done that before." Karen tried to laugh it off though the sound cracked halfway through. "Dogs love me, Your Honor. He probably smells my perfume. It's floral. Expensive." "Expensive?" Judge Judy repeated dryly. "Just like the HOA lawyer you hired with the fines you collected from this woman?" The audience chuckled and Karen flushed red beneath her foundation. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "I followed protocol." "Protocol?" Judy said, raising an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." The judge opened a folder on her desk and flipped to the first page. "You claim Mrs. Lopez violated 27 community standards over 18 months. I have the list right here. Let's read a few, shall we?" She scanned the page. Number 7, chalk drawings on the driveway. Number 9, front porch light too bright. Number 15, improper hose storage. Judy's tone was calm but surgical. Every sentence landed with precision, cutting away Karen's defense layer by layer. "Tell me, Miss Benton, what's improper about a garden hose on someone's own property?" Karen's fake tears began to dry. "It's unsightly. We have a certain look to maintain in our neighborhood." "Unsightly," Judge Judy echoed. "You live in Willow Park Estates, not the Taj Mahal. You fined this woman hundreds of dollars because her children played on their own driveway. And you want this court to believe you were simply maintaining community standards." Karen's voice wavered. "It's not like that. She was difficult, Your Honor. She thought the rules didn't apply to her." Maya shifted slightly in her chair. "The rules apply to everyone," she said softly. "But not the way you use them." The courtroom murmured again. Even the bailiff's usual stoicism cracked into a faint smile. Scout, now lying calmly near the bench, rested his head on his paws but kept his eyes open, watching. Judge Judy leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Miss Benton, I've been doing this for 35 years. I can tell the difference between someone who's truly remorseful and someone who's performing for an audience." "You want to know how I can tell?" Karen swallowed hard. How?" "Because remorse doesn't need to be performed," the judge replied. "It shows up in actions, not theatrics. And right now all I see are theatrics." Karen blinked rapidly, reaching for another tissue, but stopped herself midway when she saw Scout's head lift again. A hush fell across the courtroom as the dog's nose twitched once more, his attention laser-focused on her purse resting beside the table. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Judge Judy noticed. "Something in your bag bothering him?" Karen's fingers tightened around the strap. No, Your Honor. Just my things, lip balm, perfume, tissues, you know. Why don't you open it for the court? Judy's tone was polite, but it wasn't a suggestion. Karen froze. Her eyes darted toward the cameras again. Is that really necessary? I wouldn't ask if it weren't, the judge said firmly. Open the bag. Karen's hands trembled as she unzipped the purse. She pulled out a wallet, a phone, a lipstick tube, and, just as Scout sat up straight again, a small white stick with a metallic cap. She quickly tried to shove it back in. Hold it right there, Judge Judy ordered. What's that? Karen's voice stuttered. It's just a menthol stick. For my sinuses. I have allergies. The audience erupted into a wave of whispers. Judge Judy held out her hand. Pass it to the bailiff. The bailiff brought it forward, setting it gently on the judge's desk. She examined it closely, unscrewing the cap. A sharp scent of eucalyptus and camphor filled the room. The judge looked up slowly. Miss Benton, this isn't for allergies. It's a tear stick. Actors use it to simulate crying. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The cameras zoomed in on her face as every ounce of fake composure she had carefully built began to collapse. Do you have any explanation, Judge Judy asked, her tone now deadly calm, for why you brought a theatrical tear stick into my courtroom? Karen shook her head violently. No, that's not what it is, Your Honor, I swear. My eyes were dry and I thought. You thought you could fool me? Judy's voice thundered. Or fool this court. Or maybe you thought you could fool my dog. Because, Miss Benton, let me assure you, Scout's nose doesn't lie. The audience gasped, a ripple of disbelief and satisfaction spreading through the rows. Maya sat frozen, one hand over her mouth, watching the woman who had terrorized her unravel on national television. Judge Judy leaned back, eyes never leaving the defendant. Let the record show that the defendant's supposed tears were chemically induced. This court will treat all of her emotional testimony as a performance, because that's exactly what it was. Karen slumped in her seat, the tissue still in her hand, her mascara now streaking for real. For the first time, there was no act left to hide behind. Only fear, shame, and the faint scent of menthol still hanging in the air. The silence that followed Judge Judy's statement was so complete it felt like the entire courtroom was holding its breath. Karen Benton stared at the tear stick sitting on the judge's desk like it was a loaded weapon pointed directly at her reputation. Her mind raced for an explanation, a lie that might still save her from total humiliation. But there was no escape now. The mask had slipped, and every pair of eyes in that room saw her for what she truly was. Judge Judy's pen tapped once on the desk. You've spent years using rules as a weapon, Miss Benton. Harassing families. Threatening people who couldn't fight back. And when confronted with the truth, you brought props to fake sympathy. That's not enforcement, that's manipulation. Karen opened her mouth, but her voice was a thin, breathless whisper. I didn't mean to deceive anyone. I just wanted people to take me seriously. Take you seriously? Judy's voice hardened. You fined this woman nearly $10,000 for chalk drawings and holiday wreaths. You stalked her home and sent threatening letters to her family. And now you want me to believe you were just enforcing community values? Karen's lips quivered. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. People move into our community because it's clean, respectable. I worked hard to keep it that way. By terrorizing your neighbors? Judy shot back. By driving 17 families out in less than 5 years? That's your idea of respectable? Karen's eyes widened. How do you know about that? Judge Judy opened another folder, the one her research team had prepared. Because I did my homework. You think this show runs without background checks? My producers spoke with former residents of Willow Park. We have emails, letters, even recorded voicemails of you threatening homeowners with liens if they didn't comply with your suggested donations. Sound familiar? The color drained from Karen's face. That was misunderstood. They were voluntary contributions. Voluntary? Judy's tone was icy. When you tell someone their property might be seized if they don't pay, that's not voluntary. That's extortion. The courtroom audience erupted in murmurs again, this time more animated. Even the bailiff had to suppress a smirk. Maya Lopez sat silently, her eyes glistening, not with revenge but relief. For the first time in 2 years she was being heard. Judge Judy continued, her tone razor-sharp. You thought hiding behind paperwork and fake tears would protect you. You thought you could weaponize procedure and empathy in the same breath. But here's something you clearly never learned. Real emotion can't be bought in a pharmacy aisle. Karen's composure was crumbling fast. I just wanted order, she whispered. Nobody respects authority anymore. Authority isn't respect, Miss Benton. Authority is responsibility. And you failed it in every possible way. Judge Judy flipped to a new document and held it up for the cameras. This is the accounting record from your HOA's general fund. Over $8,000 transferred to an entity called Benton Community Consulting. That's your cousin's business, correct? Karen's eyes darted from side to side. It's a legitimate service. He helps manage finances. Except there's no record of any actual service performed, Judy interrupted. You funneled HOA money to family members. That's embezzlement, plain and simple. The audience gasped. Karen's shoulders tensed as the weight of her actions pressed down on her. I didn't steal. I was reimbursing expenses, meetings, office supplies. Judy cut her off with a sharp gesture. Miss Benton, I've seen every excuse in the book. You've been running a private dictatorship under the name of community management. And when the consequences finally arrived, you tried to cry your way out of them. Scout lifted his head again as if punctuating the statement. The audience erupted in light laughter, and Judge Judy allowed herself the faintest smirk. Even he doesn't buy it. Karen's head bowed. I don't know what you want from me, Your Honor. I want honesty, Judy replied. For once in your life. So let's try this again. Why did you really target Mrs. Lopez? Karen hesitated. Her breathing quickened. She questioned me, she finally said. At a board meeting 2 years ago. She accused me of favoritism. I was embarrassed in front of everyone. So this was personal, Judy said, leaning forward. You turned an entire association into your personal revenge tool because someone bruised your ego. Karen said nothing. The silence spoke louder than any confession. Judy's voice softened, but only slightly. You see, that's the difference between people like you and people like Mrs. Lopez. She works long hours helping others. You sit in a comfortable chair policing door wreaths. One of you builds communities, the other tears them down. Karen's lower lip trembled again, but there were no tears left to fake. Just the sting of humiliation. Judge Judy turned to Maya. Mrs. Lopez, what do you want from this court today? Maya hesitated, then said quietly, I just want it to stop. I want her to leave people alone. No one should live in fear of their own neighborhood. Judy nodded. That's reasonable. And it's exactly what's about to happen. She faced the defendant again. Miss Benton, I've seen arrogance before. I've seen entitlement. But rarely do I see someone who abuses power and then pretends to cry about it. You have managed to insult both justice and decency in the same hour. Karen's shoulders shook, her voice now hoarse. Please, Your Honor, this has gone too far. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I can fix it. Fix it? Judy repeated coldly. You had 8 years to fix it. Instead, you destroyed lives and collected fines like trophies. The only thing you're fixing today is your own mess. For a moment, all was still again. Scout shifted, resting his chin on his paws as if signaling the end of the act. The cameras zoomed in on Karen's face. The same woman who had strutted into this courtroom dripping with confidence now looked like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. Judge Judy's final words in that moment would echo across the internet for months. You can fake tears, Miss Benton, but you can't fake truth. And today, truth just walked all over you on 4 paws. By the time Judge Judy's final words echoed through the room, Karen Benton's entire world had started to collapse in real time. The cameras caught everything. The trembling hands, the shallow breaths, the desperate glance toward the door as if she could somehow escape the lens of accountability. But there was no escape. The story was already bigger than her. The scent of menthol still lingered faintly in the air like the ghost of her performance, and the internet would soon make sure everyone in America knew about it. Judge Judy took a long pause, flipping her notes back to the first page. She wasn't finished. Now that we've established that your tears were fake, she began, let's discuss the very real consequences of your actions. She turned to the bailiff. Mr. Bird, please confirm the financial totals from the HOA documents. The bailiff nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The defendant imposed $9,450 in fines against Mrs. Lopez, plus an additional $3,200 in special compliance fees that appear to have gone to a company under her cousin's name. Judge Judy's gaze cut back to Karen like a blade. And do you have receipts for where that money went, Miss Benton? Karen's face paled. Some of it was used for community maintenance, landscaping, security, that kind of thing. Then you won't mind showing proof, Judy said calmly. Invoices, receipts, payments, anything. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. No words came. The silence stretched for so long that you could hear the faint shuffle of papers in the back row. Judge Judy leaned forward. That's what I thought. Because it doesn't exist. You weren't maintaining the neighborhood. You were maintaining control. She paused deliberately, letting each word strike the air. You ran that HOA like your personal fiefdom, and when someone questioned your authority, you punished them until they broke. Karen looked down, her voice barely audible. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing, Judy repeated. You thought the right thing was to humiliate a nurse who works 12-hour shifts caring for sick people, all because she asked a question about fairness. You thought the right thing was to fine families out of their homes. And when you finally stood here in front of a real court, you couldn't even own it. You brought props. The audience murmured, a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. Some were shaking their heads. Others watched in stunned silence as Judge Judy's words struck harder than any gavel could. Maya Lopez sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the judge. The relief washing over her wasn't vengeful, it was cleansing. For months she'd dreamed of this moment, but she never expected it to come with such poetic justice. Even Scout seemed to relax, lying back down, his work complete. Judy looked over the paperwork one more time before delivering the next blow. Mrs. Lopez, she said, you are awarded full reimbursement of all fines paid, $9 for 50, and an additional $10,000 in damages for emotional distress and harassment. Karen's head shot up. 10,000? That's outrageous. What's outrageous, Judy replied, is how you've treated human beings as chess pieces in your little game of control. Consider this your first real lesson in accountability. Karen's voice cracked. Please, Your Honor. I can't afford that. You should have thought of that before terrorizing your neighbors, Judy snapped. Actions have consequences. Karen gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. You're ruining my life. Judge Judy's reply was cold and final. No, Miss Benton. You did that yourself. The courtroom broke into applause, an unusual breach of decorum, but one Judy didn't stop. Even the bailiff smiled as Scout lifted his head, wagging his tail slightly, as if signaling that justice had finally been done. Maya covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed, tears of relief slipping quietly down her face. For once these were real. Judge Judy waited for the applause to subside. Then she addressed the audience directly. Let this be a lesson. Rules exist to create order, not oppression. When power is abused, it stops being leadership. It becomes tyranny. And tyranny, no matter how small, always collapses under the weight of truth. She turned to Scout. Good job, boy, she said softly, reaching down to pat his head. The dog leaned in affectionately, calm and content. The cameras caught the moment, immortalizing it as the image that would soon dominate social media feeds around the world. Judge Judy's hand on Scout's head, Karen Benton frozen in shame just a few feet away. As the gavel struck, the sound seemed to reverberate through the entire set. Case closed, Judy said. And for the record, Miss Benton, if you ever find yourself tempted to perform again, I suggest you take it to a theater, not a courtroom. The audience laughed, the tension finally breaking. Karen didn't. She sat still, blinking rapidly, the tears finally real this time. But the sympathy she once demanded was gone. When she stood to leave, her posture had lost every ounce of the superiority she'd walked in with. Her designer jacket looked suddenly too heavy. Her makeup, streaked with black lines, told the story of a woman undone by her own arrogance. Outside the courtroom doors, the cameras waited. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions about the tear stick, about the dog, about how it felt to be publicly exposed. Karen kept her head down, pushing through the crowd. But no matter where she went, that footage would follow. Millions of people were already watching, sharing and laughing, not because she cried but because of why she did. By the next morning, every major platform had picked up the clip. #ScoutKnows began trending across social media. Memes flooded in, screenshots of Scout staring at Karen's hand captioned with lines like, lie detector, 100% accuracy, and menthol tears detected. Late-night hosts replayed the footage with commentary, and talk shows discussed how one golden retriever had done what most lawyers couldn't, sniff out dishonesty on live television. But amid the viral frenzy, one moment stood above all, the still frame of Judge Judy looking at Scout with quiet pride as the courtroom erupted in applause. It wasn't just justice. It was poetic justice. And it reminded millions watching that truth has a way of revealing itself, even when someone tries to hide behind tears. Months passed, but the memory of that day never left anyone who had seen it. The viral clip of Scout exposing Karen's fake tears had become more than entertainment. It had turned into a symbol of poetic justice. Communities across the country began re-evaluating their homeowners associations, with headlines calling it the Scout Effect. HOA boards that once ruled with fear were now facing questions, transparency demands and accountability. For Maya Lopez, life finally returned to peace. Her neighbors rallied around her, hosting a small celebration where they gifted her a sign that read, "Kindness is the only rule." Her children started drawing on the driveway again, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed freely through their street. Karen Benton, meanwhile, had disappeared from public view. The humiliation of being exposed on national television had followed her everywhere. Her name became synonymous with hypocrisy. When she tried to move to another neighborhood, she was met with rejection letters from HOAs that didn't want her anywhere near their leadership. Even her cousin's fraudulent consulting company was investigated and dissolved. What she had built on intimidation crumbled beneath the weight of her deceit. Judge Judy never commented publicly on the case again, but in a later interview when asked about Scout's reaction she smiled faintly and said, "Justice doesn't always come from a gavel. Sometimes it comes from instinct." That single quote went viral again, reminding everyone that truth can't be hidden forever. The legacy of the case became a moral for millions. Real emotion doesn't need props, and power without compassion will always expose itself in the end. In the final image of the episode's rerun, Scout sat beside the bench, calm and loyal, as Judy's voiceover said what the internet had already decided: some lies are clever but honesty has the better nose. The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered arrogance meeting its absolute destruction. Victoria Ashford, the wife of a Fortune 500 CEO who hadn't worked a single day in her pampered life but somehow managed to spend $40,000 every month on shopping sprees, walked into Judge Judy's courtroom wearing a Cartier Love bracelet encrusted with diamonds worth more than most people earn in an entire year. Her smile radiated the kind of confidence that screamed, "I own you, I own this room, and I own everyone in it." She was here for what should have been a simple $3,200 dispute with her former personal assistant, a case that any reasonable person would settle quickly, maybe pay what was owed, and move on with their privileged life. Should take 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, and then she would be back to her country club brunch where she could laugh about this inconvenience with her equally entitled friends over champagne and gossip. But 52-year-old Victoria Ashford made a decision in that courtroom that would cost her $50,000 in judgments and fines, her marriage to the CEO she constantly name-dropped, her entire social standing in the community where she had once reigned like untouchable royalty, and every single ounce of dignity she had left. When Judge Judy questioned her about unpaid wages owed to a struggling single mother, when the judge dared to treat her like she was just another defendant rather than the wife of someone important, Victoria did something so breathtakingly entitled, so shockingly disrespectful that even the bailiff who had seen everything in his 20 years of service had to step forward. She actually snapped her fingers at Judge Judy Scanlon like she was summoning a waiter at a restaurant, like she was calling over a servant who had been too slow bringing her cocktail. The sound of that snap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. And then Victoria Ashford opened her mouth and said 7 words that would turn her into the most hated woman on the internet, 7 words that would be shared 127 million times across every social media platform imaginable. "Do you know who my husband is?" What happens next isn't just courtroom justice where a plaintiff gets what they're owed and everyone goes home satisfied. This is a masterclass in why money doesn't buy respect, why treating human beings like disposable servants eventually catches up with you, and why one entitled woman's arrogance would trigger the most devastating takedown in Judge Judy history. A takedown so brutal, so methodical, so absolutely comprehensive that it would cost Victoria her marriage when her husband filed for divorce the moment he saw the episode, her reputation when she became known nationwide as the most entitled CEO wife in America, and exposed dark secrets about how she had been systematically abusing household employees for over a decade. Before we show you the exact moment Victoria's perfectly curated world exploded in spectacular fashion on national television, before we reveal how Judge Judy had been setting a trap from the very first question, you need to smash that like button right now because you're about to witness the most satisfying courtroom destruction in TV history. Hit subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about this CEO wife's pattern of abuse, the criminal investigation it triggers, and the devastating consequences that follow will absolutely shock you to your core. If this story about entitled rich people who think they're above everyone else finally getting what they deserve makes you believe that karma is real and justice still exists, comment justice served below. Trust me when I say the next 20 minutes will restore your faith that no amount of money, no powerful husband, no designer clothes can protect you when you disrespect the wrong judge and cross the line from arrogance into actual criminal behavior. Here's a question that everyone watching needs to consider. When exactly did some people start believing that marrying wealth gives them the right to treat other human beings like disposable servants who exist only to make their lives more comfortable? When did having access to unlimited money convince certain individuals that the rules of basic human decency somehow don't apply to them anymore? Because what happened to Victoria Ashford in Judge Judy's courtroom proves beyond any shadow of doubt that Judge Judy remembers something that entitled people often forget. Behind every luxury lifestyle, behind every $40,000 monthly shopping budget, behind every country club membership and designer wardrobe, there are real people who actually work for a living. Real people with families and dreams and bills to pay. Real people who deserve to be treated with basic respect and dignity regardless of how much money is in their employer's bank account. And when someone forgets that fundamental truth, when someone like Victoria Ashford decides that wealth makes her superior to the people who work for her, Judge Judy is there to deliver a reality check so devastating that it changes lives forever. Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock sharp, Studio 4A in the Judge Judy production facility. The case being called was Maria Santos versus Victoria Ashford, a dispute over $3,200 in unpaid wages, wrongful termination, and emotional distress. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the assembled audience as he announced the parties, and the contrast between the two women entering that courtroom couldn't have been more stark or more symbolic of everything this case represented. Victoria Ashford entered first, and she didn't just walk into the courtroom, she made an entrance like she was arriving at a gala event where photographers should be waiting to capture her importance. Her Chanel suit, perfectly tailored and unmistakably expensive at $8,500, moved with her like a second skin. The Hermes Birkin bag dangling from her arm carried a price tag of $25,000, the kind of accessory that screams wealth so loudly it drowns out everything else. That Cartier bracelet on her wrist, the one encrusted with enough diamonds to blind anyone standing too close, had cost her $45,000, though she would tell anyone who asked that it was just a little gift her husband picked up for her birthday. Her blonde hair was fresh from the salon, highlighted and styled to perfection, not a strand out of place. And then there were the sunglasses, oversized Gucci frames that cost $600, perched on her face indoors like she was some celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi rather than a defendant in a wage theft case. Judge Judy's first words to Victoria were simple and direct, the kind of instruction any reasonable person would follow immediately without question. Mrs. Ashford, remove your sunglasses. This is a courtroom, not a fashion runway. But Victoria's response told everyone watching exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. She removed the sunglasses with exaggerated slowness, accompanied by an eye roll so dramatic it could have been seen from the back row, and her voice dripped with annoyed condescension when she spoke. Seriously? I just had Botox injections this morning. The lights in here are incredibly harsh on my face. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, that moment before a storm when animals sense danger and start seeking shelter. Put your phone away as well, Mrs. Ashford. You're in my courtroom now, and you'll give these proceedings your full attention. Maria Santos entered the courtroom like she was walking into a place where her fate would be decided, because that's exactly what was happening. She was 34 years old, a Latina immigrant who had come to the United States at age 12 with dreams of building a better life for herself and eventually for the family she would raise. She wore a modest dress purchased from a department store, probably on sale, the kind of outfit that working people wear when they need to look presentable but can't afford designer labels. In her hands she clutched a folder containing text messages, emails, photographs, and evidence that represented 14 months of systematic abuse and exploitation. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying in that specific moment, but from months of stress, from working 3 jobs simultaneously since being fired without final payment, from lying awake at night wondering how she would feed her 2 children, ages 7 and 10, while fighting for justice against someone with unlimited resources. Her hands trembled slightly as she held that folder against her chest like a shield, and beside her sat her elderly mother who spoke almost no English but had insisted on being there to support her daughter through this ordeal. The gallery was packed with people who had come for different reasons but would all leave forever changed by what they witnessed. Several former employees of Victoria Ashford sat scattered throughout the audience, women who had worked as housekeepers, nannies, personal assistants, and chefs in the Ashford household over the past decade. They had seen the case listed on the Judge Judy website and had traveled from across the state to be present, to bear witness, to finally see someone hold Victoria accountable for behavior they had all experienced but felt powerless to challenge. A local reporter sat in the third row, notebook ready, having heard rumors about this case and sensing it might be something bigger than a standard small claims dispute. Representatives from a women's advocacy group had come after Maria reached out to them for support in navigating the legal system. And scattered throughout were people who simply recognized Victoria Ashford's name from society pages and charity galas, people from her own social circle who had heard whispers about how she treated her staff but had never seen it confronted directly. Judge Judy reviewed the case file in front of her with the methodical attention of someone who had presided over 20,000 cases and developed an almost supernatural ability to spot patterns of abuse, manipulation, and fraud within the first 30 seconds. Mrs. Ashford, you're being sued by your former personal assistant for $3,200 in unpaid wages and wrongful termination. How do you respond to these allegations? Victoria Ashford didn't look up from her phone when Judge Judy asked the question. Her perfectly manicured fingers continued scrolling through whatever she found more important than the legal proceedings happening around her, and when she finally did respond, her voice carried the kind of dismissive irritation someone might use when dealing with a particularly persistent telemarketer. This whole thing is completely ridiculous, Your Honor. These people always try to squeeze extra money out of you after they've been let go from employment. It's a predictable pattern with this type of employee. The phrase "this type of employee" hung in the air like poison gas, and Judge Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, that first warning sign that experienced viewers of her show recognized as the calm before a devastating storm. Mrs. Ashford, I asked you a specific question. Did you pay Ms. Santos the wages you owed her for her final month of employment? Answer yes or no. Victoria sighed loudly, the kind of exaggerated exhale that communicated her belief that everyone in the courtroom was wasting her valuable time. She became unreliable toward the end, Your Honor. Her performance declined significantly. I was withholding final payment until she completed tasks to my satisfaction. That's standard practice in household employment. Judge Judy's voice took on an edge that could cut through steel. Standard practice. Mrs. Ashford, withholding wages because you're unsatisfied with an employee's performance isn't standard practice. It's called wage theft, and it's illegal in every state in this country. Victoria's response was to laugh, actually laugh out loud in a courtroom where a single mother was fighting for money she desperately needed to feed her children. Theft. That's incredibly dramatic, Your Honor. I was planning to pay her eventually once she met my standards and completed her duties appropriately. Judge Judy leaned forward in her chair with the focused intensity of a predator who had just spotted weakness in prey. When exactly were you planning to pay her, Mrs. Ashford? When you felt like it? Victoria shrugged with the kind of casual indifference that made several people in the gallery audibly gasp. Well, yes. It's my money, isn't it? I decide when and how it gets distributed to people who work for me. Maria Santos sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, and when Judge Judy turned to her with a gentler tone, asking her to explain what her employment had been like, the story that emerged painted a picture of systematic exploitation that went far beyond a simple wage dispute. Maria's voice shook as she spoke, but she forced the words out with the determination of someone who had finally found the courage to speak truth to power. Your Honor, I worked for Mrs. Ashford for 14 months as her personal assistant. The job was supposed to be 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, for $800 per week. That's what the contract said. That's what I agreed to. But within the first month, everything changed. The job became my entire life. She would call me at 2 in the morning demanding I come to her house immediately to pick up her dry cleaning because she had decided she wanted to wear a specific dress the next day. She would text me at 11:30 at night telling me to come over right then because her friends were arriving for brunch the next morning and she needed me to prepare the guest room. I have 2 young daughters, Your Honor. I missed my oldest daughter's school play, the one she had been practicing for all semester, because Mrs. Ashford needed someone to accompany her shopping and she insisted it had to be that specific afternoon. Judge Judy asked Maria to present her evidence, and what followed was a devastating catalogue of abuse that had been meticulously documented over 14 months. Text messages filled the courtroom screen, each one more demanding and unreasonable than the last. 2:47 in the morning, where are you? I need my sleeping pills from the pharmacy right now. 3:15 in the morning, I cannot sleep. Come to the house and make me chamomile tea. Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, church service is at 10. Be here at 7 to help me choose my outfit and do my hair. The messages went on, a relentless stream of demands that treated Maria not as an employee with set hours and reasonable boundaries, but as property that Victoria could summon whenever the impulse struck her. Then came the emails, and these were even worse because they revealed not just the unreasonable demands but the contempt and cruelty behind them. One email read, "Your English is absolutely terrible. How did you even manage to get a green card with such poor language skills?" Another stated, "When my friends are visiting, do not speak to them directly. Just serve the refreshments and try to be invisible. You're here to work, not to socialize with your betters." A third email, sent just 2 weeks before Maria was fired, said, "You should consider yourself lucky to work for someone like me. Most people like you spend their lives cleaning toilets in office buildings. I've given you an opportunity to be around successful people and learn how the world really works." The photographs Maria presented next were time-stamped proof of the impossible schedule Victoria had demanded, and they painted a picture of exploitation so severe it bordered on indentured servitude. Images showed Maria arriving at the Ashford mansion at midnight, 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, always exhausted, always responding to another urgent summons that couldn't possibly wait until normal working hours. Screenshots of her work calendar revealed 18-hour days stretching across weeks without a single day off, schedules that would have violated labor laws in any legitimate employment situation. 6 straight months without a weekend, without a holiday, without even a few consecutive hours to spend with her own children who were growing up with a mother too exhausted and too terrified of losing her income to ever say no to another unreasonable demand. Victoria's response to this mountain of evidence was a performance in calculated dismissiveness that made the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "That's just how demanding professional positions work, Your Honor. If she couldn't handle the requirements of employment with a high-profile household, she should have sought work elsewhere. Nobody forced her to stay. She could have quit at any time if the job was too difficult for her capabilities." Judge Judy's voice dropped to that dangerously quiet tone that made even the camera operators stop moving. "Mrs. Ashford, you're telling this court that expecting 24-hour availability, demanding someone abandon their children for your shopping trips, and sending messages at 3 in the morning is normal employment practice?" Victoria met her gaze with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for anything in her entire privileged life. "For someone in my position, yes. People who work in high-end household management understand that excellence requires sacrifice. Sometimes that means being available when needed rather than watching the clock like hourly workers at fast food restaurants." Judge Judy gestured to the bailiff, and suddenly 3 women stood up from the gallery and approached the bench. "Mrs. Ashford, I see Ms. Santos brought character witnesses. These women have sworn statements about their own experiences working in your household." The first witness was a Latina woman in her 50s named Carmen Rodriguez who had worked as Victoria's housekeeper for 3 years. "Your Honor, Mrs. Ashford treated all of us like we were animals, not people. She called us the help to our faces, never by our names, just hey you or the help. She made my 16-year-old daughter, who was helping me clean one summer, scrub the floors on her hands and knees while Mrs. Ashford stood over her laughing and saying this is what happens when you don't go to college, this is your future if you don't study hard. My daughter cried for hours that night. She felt humiliated and worthless. And when I asked Mrs. Ashford to please treat my child with some basic respect, she fired me on the spot without paying me my final 2 weeks of wages. The second witness was an African-American woman in her 40s named Patricia Williams who had worked as the Ashford family nanny for 2 years. I took care of Mrs. Ashford's stepchildren, Your Honor. She would call me at all hours of the day and night, berate me in front of the children for small mistakes, tell those kids right in front of me that this is what happens when you don't apply yourself in school, you end up taking care of other people's children instead of having a real career. She used me as an example of failure to motivate her stepchildren. She once told them, "Look at Patricia, she's 40 years old and still working as a nanny because she made poor life choices." The cruelty wasn't just directed at me, Your Honor. It was weaponized to teach those children that people like me, people who work service jobs, are somehow less than human. And she owes me $4,800 in unpaid overtime that she promised to pay but never did. The third witness was Kevin Chen, an Asian-American chef in his 30s who had worked in the Ashford household for 6 months before fleeing what he described as the most toxic work environment of his entire culinary career. Your Honor, she threw food at me. Literally threw a plate of salmon at my head because she said the temperature wasn't exactly 145 degrees as she'd specified. The plate shattered against the wall behind me, and she stood there laughing while I cleaned it up, saying that's what you get for incompetence, maybe next time you'll pay attention to details. She never paid me for my final 3 weeks of work. Just told me to get out of her house and said if I caused any trouble, her husband's lawyers would destroy me in court. I was too scared to fight back because I'm trying to get my citizenship, and I thought someone that powerful could have me deported. Victoria sat through these testimonies with visible contempt, rolling her eyes at each witness, examining her manicured nails during the most emotional moments, and even checking her watch twice as if calculating how much longer she would have to tolerate listening to the complaints of people she considered beneath her. Judge Judy watched every gesture, every dismissive movement, cataloging Victoria's complete lack of empathy with the clinical precision of someone building an airtight case. Mrs. Ashford, I'm noticing a pattern here. Multiple employees, all claiming abuse and unpaid wages. All of them women of color or immigrants. All of them working class people trying to support their families. Do you see the pattern I'm seeing? Victoria's response was delivered with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to small children. Your Honor, people in my position require staff who understand excellence and high standards. Sometimes that means being firm with people who aren't accustomed to the level of quality that wealthy households expect. I'm not going to apologize for having standards. Judge Judy's voice rose slightly, the temperature in the courtroom dropping several degrees as her patience finally reached its absolute limit. Firm. You called a 16-year-old girl an animal. You threw food at your chef's head. You demanded 24-hour availability from a single mother while paying poverty wages. That's not firmness, Mrs. Ashford. That's abuse. That's exploitation. That's treating human beings like they're your personal property. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, her face flushed with anger at being challenged by someone she clearly viewed as just another employee who needed to be put in her place. How dare you judge me? I pay these people more than they would make anywhere else. They should be grateful for the opportunity to work in my home, to be around successful people, to learn from someone who understands how the world actually works. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my husband is? The courtroom went absolutely nuclear silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Victoria wasn't finished with her spectacular display of entitled fury. She actually snapped her fingers at Judge Judy, the sharp sound cracking through the silence like a whip, a gesture of such profound disrespect that the bailiff immediately stepped forward and several audience members audibly gasped. My husband is Richard Ashford. He's the CEO of Ashford Technologies, a Fortune 500 company. He has more power in his little finger than you'll ever have in your entire career as a television judge. One phone call from him and your life becomes very difficult, so maybe you should think carefully about how you proceed here. Judge Judy stood up from her chair, a rare and terrifying movement that signaled the complete destruction that was about to unfold. Mrs. Ashford, in 25 years of presiding over this courtroom, I have encountered arrogance, entitlement, and cruelty in many forms. But you represent something I find particularly repulsive. You didn't just abuse these women. You stole from them. You exploited their vulnerable positions. You used their immigration status and their financial desperation as weapons to control them. And now you have the audacity to threaten me with your husband's power as if that means anything in my courtroom. Her voice built to a crescendo that filled every corner of the studio. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Mrs. Ashford, and I want you to listen very carefully because your life is about to change dramatically. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Maria Santos. You will pay her $3,200 in unpaid wages immediately. You will pay an additional $10,000 in emotional distress damages for the psychological abuse you inflicted over 14 months. You will pay $5,000 in punitive damages because your behavior was willful, malicious, and designed to exploit someone you viewed as powerless. And you will pay $2,000 to cover her legal expenses and time off work to be here today. Total judgment $20,200, due immediately upon this ruling. Victoria's face cycled through shock, rage, and then pure panic as Judge Judy continued with devastating precision. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation into wage theft, which is a felony in this state carrying up to 3 years in prison. I am forwarding my complete case file, including all witness statements and evidence, to the Department of Labor for civil investigation into your pattern of labor law violations. I am contacting the 16 other employees you've quietly settled with to inform them they can file criminal complaints against you. I am sending everything to your husband's personal attorney with a recommendation that he investigate your use of marital funds to settle these cases without his knowledge. And finally, I am releasing my findings to the media because the public has a right to know about systematic abuse of vulnerable workers. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, mascara streaming down her face in dark rivers, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the reality crashed down that she had just destroyed her entire life on national television. Judge Judy delivered her final statement with cold satisfaction. Get out of my courtroom, Mrs. Ashford. And when you lose everything, when your husband divorces you and your friends abandon you and your name becomes synonymous with entitled cruelty, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you could have simply paid this woman what you owed her. Instead, you chose arrogance, and arrogance chose to destroy you completely.
The Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom fell into stunned silence as 500 of Hollywood's most powerful executives watched Ellen DeGeneres lean into her microphone with that signature smile everyone thought they knew. It was supposed to be a simple charity panel about kindness and entertainment, but what happened next would shatter Ellen's carefully crafted image forever. Judge Judy is just mean, Ellen said, her voice dripping with condescension. That's not real justice, that's just being cruel. For TV ratings, the audience shifted uncomfortably in their gold-rimmed chairs, crystal glasses frozen halfway to lips. A studio head from Warner Brothers whispered to his assistant, "Did she really just say that?" Near the front, Portia de Rossi's knuckles went white as she gripped her purse, knowing something terrible was about to unfold. But Judge Judy didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her steel-gray eyes locked on Ellen like a hawk studying its prey. The legendary judge who had destroyed countless liars in her courtroom slowly reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila folder. The sound of papers rustling cut through the silence like a blade. Ellen's smile faltered for just a split second as she noticed the folder, but she had no idea what was coming. The folder contained 47 documented complaints from Ellen's own staff, members, detailing years of psychological torment behind the scenes of America's most beloved talk show. Stories of employees being fired for making eye contact, of producers crying in bathroom stalls, of the woman who preached "be kind," creating what one former staffer called a culture of fear and intimidation. Judge Judy's fingers drummed once against the table, a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel in the hushed ballroom. James Corden, the panel moderator, tried desperately to lighten the mood, but his nervous laughter died in his throat as Judy's penetrating stare silenced him mid-sentence. Entertainment. Tonight's cameras captured every micro-expression, every bead of sweat forming on Ellen's forehead, every twitch of her forced smile beginning to crack. What Judge Judy revealed next didn't just expose Ellen's lies. It destroyed everything America believed about daytime television's sweetheart, turning her own weapon of public humiliation against her in the most devastating way imaginable. If you want to see how Judge Judy used Ellen's own staff complaints to completely obliterate her in front of Hollywood's elite, keep watching, because what she reveals next will leave you speechless. Hit subscribe now because this story gets absolutely brutal. For 15 excruciating seconds, Judge Judy said absolutely nothing. She methodically opened the manila folder, her weathered fingers moving with the precision of someone who had spent decades dismantling liars piece by piece. Ellen's confident smile began to waver as she waited for the applause that never came. Instead, the ballroom filled with the suffocating tension of 500 people holding their breath, watching a master at work. A publicist in the third row frantically typed on her phone, already crafting damage control statements she prayed she wouldn't need. Ellen fidgeted with her wedding ring, that nervous tick she thought no one noticed. Well, she laughed awkwardly, trying to fill the void. I mean, we all know Judy can be a little intense, right? Her voice cracked slightly on the word intense, betraying the panic creeping into her chest. But Judge Judy remained stone-cold silent, scanning through documents like a prosecutor preparing for cross-examination. The cameras caught every detail, Ellen's forced smile dissolving, her fingers drumming against the table, the way her eyes kept darting to that damning folder. James Corden cleared his throat desperately. Perhaps we should move on to our next question about... But Judge Judy raised one finger, and the room fell dead silent again. That single gesture carried more authority than any gavel. She slowly removed her reading glasses, cleaned them with deliberate care, and placed them back on her nose. The simple act felt ceremonial, like a judge putting on robes before delivering a death sentence. Ellen's breathing quickened as she realized this wasn't going away. This wasn't some playful celebrity banter that would be forgotten by morning. Judge Judy was preparing to do what she did best: destroy someone who thought they were untouchable. The folder contained Ellen's darkest secrets, and America's toughest judge was about to read them aloud to Hollywood's most powerful people. Ellen had picked a fight with the wrong person, and everyone in that ballroom was about to witness her complete annihilation. Judge Judy finally looked up from her folder, her piercing eyes locking onto Ellen with the intensity of a predator who had cornered its prey. When she spoke, her voice cut through the ballroom like a scalpel through silk. "Ellen," she began, each word measured and deliberate, "before you lecture me about being mean, perhaps we should discuss what your own employees have to say about your version of kindness." Ellen's face went completely white, her signature smile vanishing like smoke. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, just a strangled gasp that the microphone picked up and amplified to every corner of the room. Judge Judy lifted the first document from her folder with theatrical precision. Complaint number 1, filed by your former head writer Sarah Mitchell. Quote, "Ellen creates an atmosphere of terror where staff members are afraid to breathe wrong. She fires people for looking at her directly, claiming it's disrespectful. I've seen grown adults reduced to tears simply for asking clarification on a script change." The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers, phones emerging from purses and pockets, as Hollywood's elite scrambled to record this career-ending moment. A prominent agent near the back audibly gasped, "Oh my God, this is really happening." Ellen finally found her voice, but it came out shaky and desperate. "Judy, those are disgruntled former employees making things up. You know how it is when people get fired, they..." Judge Judy held up her hand, silencing Ellen mid-sentence like she was managing an unruly courtroom. "I'm not finished," she said coldly. Complaint number 7 from your former segment producer Marcus Johnson. Quote, "Ellen made me stand in the hallway for 3 hours because I accidentally put sugar in her coffee instead of artificial sweetener. When I tried to explain it was an honest mistake, she screamed that I was too stupid to work in television and should go back to waiting tables." The room was in complete shock. Portia de Rossi had her face buried in her hands, unable to watch her wife's public destruction. James Corden sat frozen, his mouth hanging open, completely powerless to control what had become a public execution. A studio executive whispered to his colleague, "This is worse than Harvey Weinstein, at least he hit it." Judge Judy wasn't done. She flipped to another page, her movements calm and methodical while Ellen squirmed in her chair like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Complaint number 12. Judge Judy continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. From your former talent coordinator Lisa Chen. Quote, Ellen forces guests to rehearse their emotional reactions multiple times until she's satisfied, with the level of tears or excitement. She told a cancer survivor that her story wasn't sad enough and made her practice crying on cue. When the woman couldn't produce tears fast enough, Ellen said she was wasting everyone's time with her fake sob story. The gasps from the audience grew louder, several celebrities shaking their heads in disgust. A prominent talk show host in the fourth row muttered, "I knew something was off about her show." Ellen tried desperately to regain control, her voice rising to near hysteria. "This is character assassination. You can't just take the word of—" But Judge Judy's stare could have frozen lava. "I have 47 documented complaints, Ellen. 47, all detailing the same pattern of psychological abuse, humiliation, and toxic behavior. You want to call me mean? I'm direct with people who waste my time in court. You torture people who are just trying to make a living." The folder in Judge Judy's hands seemed to grow heavier with each word, containing secrets that would end Ellen's career and destroy everything America thought they knew about daytime television's supposed queen of kindness. The woman who built an empire on Be Kind was about to learn that karma has no expiration date. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she watched Ellen's world collapse in real time. But she wasn't finished, not even close. "Ellen, do you remember your former executive producer David Martinez?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. Ellen's eyes widened in pure terror because she knew exactly who David Martinez was and what he had witnessed behind the scenes. "David worked for you for 8 years, Judge Judy continued, pulling out a thicker document. "He documented everything. Every tantrum, every firing, every moment you dropped your fake smile the second the cameras stopped rolling." Ellen lunged forward desperately, her composure completely shattered. "Judy, please, this isn't fair. You're destroying my life." But Judge Judy's expression remained stone cold. "Fair? Let me tell you what isn't fair. David's complaint states that you fired a pregnant production assistant because, and I quote, her morning sickness was ruining the energy on set. You told her that having a baby was her choice, and you weren't going to let it affect your ratings." The ballroom exploded. Several celebrities stood up in shock, a prominent actress shouting, "That's disgusting!" The sound of chairs scraping against marble echoed as people shifted away from Ellen, like she was radioactive. But Judge Judy was just getting started. She held up a thick stack of photographs, each one showing Ellen in moments she never wanted public. "David also provided photographic evidence," she announced, causing every phone in the room to point toward the stage. Pictures of Ellen screaming, at crew members throwing scripts at assistants, and my personal favorite, Ellen making a janitor clean up coffee. She deliberately spilled, just to watch him crawl around on his hands and knees. Ellen tried to grab for the photos, but Judge Judy pulled them back with the reflexes of someone who had dealt with desperate defendants for decades. "You want to see mean, Ellen?" Judge Judy's voice rose for the first time, commanding the attention of every person in that ballroom. "Mean is what you did to Jennifer Walsh, your former makeup artist. David documented how you fired her the day before Christmas because she asked for a raise to pay for her daughter's cancer treatments. You told her, and I have this on audio recording, that her problems weren't your responsibility, and maybe she should find a job that actually pays well." The room went dead silent except for the sound of Ellen sobbing. Real tears this time, not the manufactured emotion she was famous for on her show. James Corden tried one last desperate attempt to save the event. "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we should—" Judge Judy's glare could have stopped a freight train. "Sit down, James, I'm not finished." Her command was so authoritative that Corden immediately dropped back into his chair like a scolded child. Ellen was hyperventilating now, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized there was no way out. No PR team could spin this. No legal team could stop it. Judge Judy had her dead to rights with evidence that would end everything. "Here's what's really mean, Ellen," Judge Judy continued, her voice building to a crescendo that would be replayed millions of times across social media. "Mean is building a billion-dollar empire on the backs of employees you treated like garbage while pretending to be America's sweetheart. Mean is preaching Be Kind while creating a workplace so toxic that 3 people attempted suicide because of the psychological abuse you put them through." Ellen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with horror. "Yes, Ellen. Suicide attempts. David documented those too, including the note left by your former assistant Tommy Richards that specifically mentioned how your daily humiliation made him feel worthless." The ballroom was in complete chaos now. Celebrities were streaming toward the exits, unable to associate with Ellen for another second. Portia de Rossi had disappeared entirely, probably already calling divorce lawyers. Entertainment reporters were broadcasting live from their phones, knowing they were witnessing the most spectacular career implosion in Hollywood history. Ellen sat alone at the panel table, completely destroyed, while Judge Judy calmly organized her papers like she had just finished another successful day in court. This is just the beginning of how Judge Judy systematically destroyed Ellen's carefully crafted image with documented evidence of abuse that goes deeper than anyone imagined. If you think that was brutal, wait until you see Ellen's desperate attempt to fight back and how Judge Judy delivers the final blow that ends everything. Hit that like button if you're as shocked as that audience was, because Judge Judy isn't done destroying Ellen's legacy yet. Ellen wiped her mascara-stained cheeks and suddenly her tears stopped. Something dark flashed in her eyes as desperation turned into rage. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous. You know what, Judy? Ellen snarled, her voice completely different now, stripped of all pretense. You think you're so righteous sitting there with your little folder, but you're just a bitter old woman who gets off on humiliating people on national television. At least I built something. What have you done except scream at poor people who can't fight back? Judge Judy didn't even blink. She had been waiting for this moment, for Ellen to show her true colors in front of everyone. There it is, she said quietly, her voice cutting through Ellen's hysteria like a knife through butter. The real Ellen DeGeneres. No cameras, no script, no fake smile, just pure venom. She reached into her folder one more time and pulled out a single sheet of paper that made Ellen's face go ashen. This is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Patricia Williams, the therapist you hired to counsel your staff members after what you called workplace incidents. The few remaining audience members leaned forward, sensing that Judge Judy was about to deliver a knockout punch that would end this fight forever. Dr. Williams states that in her 30 years of practice, she has never seen a workplace environment as psychologically destructive as yours. She treated 17 of your employees for panic attacks, depression, and what she clinically diagnosed as workplace-induced PTSD. Ellen tried to interrupt, but Judge Judy's voice rose like thunder. She also states that you personally called her office and threatened to ruin her career if she didn't stop treating your employees because, and I quote, their therapy sessions were making them too confident and harder to control. Ellen shot up from her chair, pointing a shaking finger at Judge Judy. You're lying. That's not what happened. She was filling their heads with lies about me. The outburst was so violent that the remaining security guards stepped closer to the stage. But Judge Judy remained seated, calm as a lake before a storm. Ellen, you just proved my point. You're more concerned about controlling people than helping them heal from the trauma you caused. She folded her hands on the table, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout. In my courtroom, I deal with liars every single day, but I've never encountered someone as manipulative and cruel as you while hiding behind a mask of kindness. The ballroom was nearly empty now, just a handful of reporters and staff members too shocked to leave. Ellen looked around desperately, realizing she was completely alone. Even her own security team had backed away, unwilling to be associated with her toxic brand for another second. James Corden had disappeared entirely, probably already in damage control meetings with his own network. Judge Judy stood up slowly, gathering her papers with the dignity of someone who had just delivered justice. You called me mean, Ellen. But mean would be destroying you without giving you a chance to defend yourself. What I did was present evidence and let the truth speak for itself. Ellen made one last desperate attempt to save face, her voice cracking with defeat. This isn't over, Judy. I'll sue you for defamation. Judge Judy turned back with a look that could freeze hell itself. Sue me with what lawyers, Ellen? Which ones are going to want to defend the woman who tortured her employees? Good luck finding anyone willing to touch this case. She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the finality of a judge's gavel. Ellen stood alone on the stage, surrounded by empty chairs and the ruins of her empire, finally understanding what it felt like to be completely powerless. Within 30 minutes of Judge Judy walking off that stage, the internet exploded like a nuclear bomb. Despite desperate attempts by Ellen's legal team to enforce NDAs, shaky phone footage from inside the ballroom was already spreading faster than wildfire. TMZ's breaking news alert crashed their servers as millions tried to access the story simultaneously. Judge Judy destroys Ellen with employee abuse evidence dominated every screen in America, and the hashtag Ellen Exposed shot to #1 worldwide within the hour. The footage was devastating. Ellen's mask slipping, her desperate tears, her violent outburst pointing and screaming at Judge Judy while security backed away. But the clip that broke the internet was Judge Judy's ice-cold delivery, The real Ellen DeGeneres. No cameras, no script, no fake smile. Just pure venom. That 10-second soundbite got 40 million views on TikTok before midnight, spawned thousands of reaction videos, and became the most shared celebrity takedown in social media history. Teen influencers were making response videos. Late night, hosts were scrambling to rewrite their monologues, and Ellen's name was trending in 17 countries. The floodgates opened immediately. Former Ellen Show employees came crawling out of the woodwork, no longer afraid to speak their truth. Sarah Mitchell, the head writer mentioned in Judge Judy's complaints, posted a 20-minute YouTube video that got 5 million views in 6 hours. Judge Judy gave me the courage to finally tell my story, she said through tears. Ellen destroyed my mental health, but I was too scared to speak up because she has so much power in Hollywood. Not anymore. The video was shared by celebrities, news outlets, and millions of ordinary people who finally understood the truth behind Ellen's fake kindness empire. Twitter became a battlefield. Justice for Ellen victims competed with "Nah, thank you, Judge Judy" as trending topics, while Ellen's supporters tried desperately to defend her with Ellen is kind. But they were drowned out by an avalanche of employee testimonies. A former producer named Marcus Johnson live tweeted his entire horrific experience working for Ellen, describing panic attacks, therapy sessions, and the 3-hour hallway punishment Judge Judy had mentioned. His thread got retweeted 2 million times and made international news. The entertainment industry moved with lightning speed to distance itself from Ellen. Warner Brothers released a statement saying they were reviewing all partnerships with Ellen's production company. Major sponsors started pulling ads from her show's reruns. Netflix quietly removed Ellen's comedy specials from their platform. A-list celebrities who had appeared on her show began posting carefully worded statements about supporting workplace safety, without mentioning Ellen by name, but everyone knew what they meant. Judge Judy, meanwhile, became an overnight folk hero. Her calm, dignified destruction of Ellen was hailed as a masterclass in justice. Judge Judy for President started trending as people praised her for doing what no one else had the courage to do. Her own show's ratings skyrocketed as fans tuned in to see the woman who had single-handedly ended Ellen's reign of terror. Late night, host Stephen Colbert summed up America's feelings perfectly. Judge Judy didn't just expose Ellen, she performed a public service. She showed us what real strength looks like when it's used to protect the powerless instead of destroying them. The most devastating blow came when Ellen's own wife, Portia de Rossi, released a statement through her publicist. "I am deeply disturbed by these revelations and need time to process what I've learned about my spouse's workplace behavior." The Onso statement was careful and legal, but the message was clear: their marriage was over, and even Ellen's closest ally had abandoned her. 6 months later, Ellen's daytime empire had completely collapsed. Her show was canceled, her production company disbanded, and her Montecito mansion sat empty with a for sale sign that nobody dared approach. The woman who once commanded $50 million per year was now unemployable, her name synonymous with workplace abuse and fake kindness. Hollywood had erased her so completely that even her star on the Walk of Fame was regularly vandalized with messages like, "Be kind to your employees," and "Judge Judy was right." But Judge Judy's legacy only grew stronger. Her methodical destruction of Ellen became required viewing in business schools as a masterclass in how to confront workplace bullies with evidence and dignity. The clips from that Beverly Hills ballroom were studied by HR departments, played in corporate training sessions, and shared by millions of employees who finally felt empowered to speak up against their own toxic bosses. Judge Judy had done more than expose one person's cruelty. She had started a revolution that made workplace abuse socially unacceptable. The most powerful moment came when Judge Judy was asked about that night during a rare interview. "I didn't destroy Ellen," she said with characteristic bluntness. "Ellen destroyed herself. I just presented the evidence." She paused, adjusting those famous glasses one more time. The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be heard. Those words became a rallying cry for abuse victims everywhere, proof that authentic strength will always defeat manufactured personas. Ellen had learned the hardest lesson of all: you can't fake integrity forever. The truth always finds a way out, and when it does, no amount of money, fame, or fake smiles can save you from the consequences of your actions. This story proves that authentic character always defeats fake personas, and that one person with the courage to speak truth can bring down even the most powerful bullies. If this story opened your eyes about the entertainment industry and the importance of treating people with real kindness, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about when justice finally wins, And remember, you can build an empire on lies, but it only takes one person with the truth to bring it all crashing down.